Jake Morrison sat in his hotel room, staring at his phone. The screen was flooded with notifications, hundreds of comments, shares, and tags. But this wasn't the kind of attention he'd been hoping for. The video of his humiliating encounter with the Royal Guard had gone viral, but not in the way he'd imagined. Instead of being hailed as the guy who finally cracked the Guard's legendary composure, he was being roasted as the poster child for disrespectful tourists. "Dude, you're trending," Mike said, scrolling through his own phone. "And not in a good way," Jake groaned, burying his face in his hands. "I thought it was going to be funny. You know, like those other videos where people try to make the guards laugh. I didn't think it would blow up like this." Sarah, ever the voice of reason, sighed. "Jake, those videos are funny because the guards don't react. That's the whole point. You tried to force it, and it backfired. Big time." Tom, who had been quietly editing footage from their trip, chimed in. "Yeah, and now you're internet famous. Congrats, buddy. You're the guy who got schooled by a Royal Guard." Jake's phone buzzed again. It was a text from his mom back in Chicago. "Jake, what on earth were you thinking? Your father and I are mortified." "Great," Jake muttered. "Even my parents are disappointed in me." The group fell silent for a moment, the weight of Jake's humiliation hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Mike broke the tension. "Look, it's not the end of the world. People will forget about it in a few days. Let's just focus on enjoying the rest of the trip." But Jake wasn't so sure. The memory of the guard's stern gaze and the crowd's judgmental stares haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed with a simple apology. The next morning, the group set out to explore more of London. Jake was quieter than usual, his usual bravado replaced by a subdued demeanor. As they walked through the bustling streets, he couldn't help but notice the sideways glances from passers-by. Were they recognizing him from the video, or was he just being paranoid? "Let's check out the Tower of London," Sarah suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "It's supposed to be amazing." Jake nodded half-heartedly, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the guard's words. "You find it amusing to mock the sovereign's guard? To disrespect a position of honor that men have died defending?" As they approached the tower, Jake's phone buzzed again. It was a notification from a popular YouTube channel. The title of the video made his stomach drop. "Dumb Tourist versus Royal Guard, The Reckoning." "Guys," Jake said, his voice trembling, "you need to see this." The group huddled around his phone as the video played. It was a compilation of clips from Jake's ill-fated stunt, interspersed with commentary from the host. And here we have Jake Morrison, the self-proclaimed life of the party, attempting to outdo every other tourist who's ever tried to make a Royal Guard crack, the host said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for Jake. The video cut to the moment when the guard had stepped forward, his commanding presence silencing the crowd. The host's voiceover continued. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when you underestimate the discipline and dedication of the Royal Guard." Jake thought he was being funny, but all he did was make a fool of himself. The video ended with a shot of Jake retreating, his face red with embarrassment. The host's final words were a gut punch. "Let this be a lesson to all you would-be pranksters out there. Some traditions are worth respecting, and if you don't, well, you might just end up like Jake." Jake handed the phone back to Mike, his face pale. "This is a nightmare." Sarah put a hand on his shoulder. "Jake, it's going to be okay. People will move on to the next big thing soon." But Jake wasn't so sure. The video had already racked up hundreds of thousands of views, and the comments were brutal. "What an idiot. This guy deserves everything he got. Respect the guards, moron." That evening, as the group sat in a pub, Jake made a decision. "I need to make this right," he said, his voice firm. "What do you mean?" Tom asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm going back to the guard post," Jake said. "I'm going to apologize." His friends exchanged skeptical looks. "Jake, I don't think that's a good idea," Sarah said. "What if they arrest you or something?" "I don't care," Jake replied. "I messed up, and I need to own it." The next morning, Jake returned to the scene of his humiliation. The same two guards were at their posts, as stoic and unmoving as ever. A small crowd of tourists had gathered, snapping photos and whispering excitedly. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice shaking slightly. The guards didn't react. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," Jake continued. "I was disrespectful and I shouldn't have been. I didn't understand what your job really means, and I took it too far. I hope you can forgive me." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the younger guard's eyes flicked toward Jake, just for a second. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Jake nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. He turned and walked away, his head held a little higher. As he rejoined his friends, Mike clapped him on the back. "That took guts, man. I'm proud of you." Jake managed a small smile. "Yeah, well, I guess I learned my lesson." And as they walked away, Jake couldn't help but feel that for the first time in a long time, he'd done the right thing. Epilogue. A few days later, a new video started making the rounds on social media. It showed Jake's apology, captured by a tourist who happened to be filming at the time. The comments were different this time. "Respect for owning up to his mistake. We all mess up, it's how we fix it that matters." Maybe there's hope for Jake after all. It wasn't the kind of viral fame Jake had been chasing, but it was a start. And as he boarded the plane back to Chicago, he couldn't help but feel that he'd grown a little, not just as a tourist, but as a person. The royal guards, of course, remained as stoic as ever, but if anyone had been paying close attention, they might have noticed the faintest hint of a smile on the younger guard's face as Jake walked away. The end.